Everybody. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining our subcommittee meeting today. I will go ahead and get started uh, with our agenda, if that's okay with everybody, since we've got quorum. I would like to call the meeting to order, and I am going to read the statement for the beginning of the meeting and do roll call. The Housing Desegregation Subcommittee, which is now called the Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee, meeting has now commenced. It is August 20th at 1 p.m. We ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. And with that, I will do roll call. Vicky Cusino, I believe that she is absent. Tisha Tallman, is Tisha here? I don't see her on the screen. Kenny Wong,
I'm here.
Lori Mazurbo,
Present.
Ray Winch,
Present.
and Jay Young. I'm here. So we do have quorum. June minutes. Did we have any minutes for our meeting?
Yes, you should have them in your in the packet I sent out last week.
Okay. Are there any changes or updates that need to be made to the June minutes? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I can make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Right?
Aye. The June meeting minutes are approved. And with that, we will jump into agenda item number 4, which is a presentation by Martina Kale. She's going to give us a presentation today about the Tucson-Pima County analysis of impediments to fair housing choice and ask for our feedback. You should have gotten the presentation and questions beforehand, so hopefully you had a little time to at least think about the questions. But the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, I think, is one of the few documents that the city and county are required to do that really, I think, specifically focuses on housing equity and with a focus on fair housing as well. And just for everybody's information, this is how I got my start in fair housing. So I've worked on a number of these in the past and have worked with Martina over the years as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Martina. Thanks for joining us and thanks for presenting.
Oh, well, thank you all for having me here today. I warned Ernesto before the meeting started that I'm having some allergy stuff going on. So if I lose my voice or start coughing, I'll mute and hide for a moment and then come back. So hopefully it won't bother us today. I am gonna share my screen with you. I think you all have the presentation, but it's probably easier if it will let me share. Here we go. All right, so you should be able to see my screen here. So as Jay mentioned, the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice is a HUD required document. It's a companion document to the 5-year HUD consolidated plan. And what the HUD consolidated plan does is it acts as kind of a long range application for certain community planning and development programs, home, CDBG, HOPWA, ESG, kind of the main players outside of the public housing part of the city department. It implements the community development block grant program certifications regarding fair housing. And it looks at a kind of a whole host of data and other information. So there's a whole socioeconomic and housing profile. We look at fair housing complaints, inquiries, and testing, HMDA or Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data to see what's going on in the lending arena. For the first time in this particular AI, I'm trying to get some more detailed eviction data relative to race, ethnicity, disability, gender. It looks at regulations and policies. So in other words, are the city and the county, since it's a joint document, are they implementing their programs appropriately? Do they have zoning and codes that don't reinforce discriminatory activity? And then it also looks at geographic concentrations, which is, do we have clusters of people of low income or certain races and ethnicities living together? So that's what it is. Done every 5 years. So what we do is we go through this assessment and then we identify impediments with the goal of making an action plan to address them. So if you've ever looked at a fair housing assessment or analysis of impediments, the last one from 2020 had 7 identified impediments and 31 actions plus a whole host of sub-actions. So there was a lot in there. And in retrospect, I've realized that this time around that we may have that many impediments, but my goal is to really focus those actions and sub-actions on some really hard-hitting kinds of activities. And I think that that's where you can really, give us some guidance here, or we can mutually guide each other. Because I think we have to be, more focused. So these things have some, they're kind of dispersed right now. So what I'm going to give you is kind of a glimpse into just a few impediments. I'm still fairly early in this process. I'm getting a draft together for staff for September. But there's a couple of things that have kind of emerged, and you may see this in your work as well. Trends are very difficult to pinpoint, and HUD likes to see, what are the trends. But our reality is how we identify ourselves as people and how people identify themselves is evolving over time. People are less likely to identify as a single race or ethnicity, or we have gender identity differences. So we're seeing a lot of changes in that way. We had a whole host of census geography changes in Pima County. That seems to happen with every decennial census in Pima County. We have an aging population, which means we have a lot more disabled people. Unfortunately, as we age, we just have more higher prevalence of disability. And then we always have some impacts from the large student population from the U of A, especially in terms of our poverty data and our income data. So like I said, I think those are just things to be aware of, is that, like, if I say something and you say, well, that's not what we're seeing, please let me know. So my questions for you today, which I think you got a preview of, is how can this impediments analysis support the work that you're doing, and vice versa? But how can your work perhaps support this analysis? I'm curious what actions you might prioritize to have a positive impact on market factors and housing choice barriers and discrimination. So kind of those, those actions we can take that have lots and lots of benefits. And then is there other research data or information that you think that I should be looking at that might contribute to the analysis? So I'm just going to kind of give you a sneak peek into some of the things that have already been identified that are going to be coming forward. So you'll see this in this italicized blue text here. Low and moderate income racial and ethnic minorities are more likely than white, non-Hispanic households to have severe housing problems. So what that means is that racial and ethnic minorities, people of color, are more likely to pay more than 50% of their income for housing. So what does that mean? We have, higher eviction rates, less opportunity for wealth generation, less opportunity for intergenerational wealth transfer when that time comes. So it's this, the severe housing problems are just serving to continue to kind of perpetuate lower wealth accumulation among people of color versus non-Hispanic white householders. So that's one of the impediments. Another impediment is that we see lower rates of loan origination among loan applicants who are people of color. So again, we're seeing, or we're not joint applicants. So again, we're seeing reduced access to credit, reduced access to housing opportunity, and reduced access to wealth generation opportunities. And I would say the second impediment along with that is that credit and housing counseling are likely not reaching a broad audience. And the reason that I say that is when we look at denials and the denial reasons, if we look at people who are non-Hispanic, people who are applying as joint applicants, and males, the primary denial reason is collateral. So in other words, they're not getting a high enough appraisal on what they're trying to buy. If we look at Hispanic white households, which is our largest minority population, credit history is the largest denial reason. So they're not demonstrating a solid enough credit history to make a lender comfortable to make a loan. And then if we look at other races and ethnicities and females, we see that credit history popping back up and debt to income ratio. So in other words, the income's not there. So the lenders are denying them based on that rationale. Ray, you had your hand up.
Yeah, before you moved on from this slide, I wanted to make sure that I fully understood. There was one point you said, was it Black families were one of the biggest barrier was the collateral? Is that right?
On this slide here, it's
It was about the collateral, like that the home wasn't being assessed at high enough value. Is that right? Could you go into more about that?
yeah. So when a lender has like 9 different reasons they can deny an application. So the primary reason when they're dealing with a non-Hispanic white loan applicant, a joint loan applicants, or male applicants, is that the property's not appraising. So that's the big difference. It's the standout primary reason for loan denial among those sections of loan applicants. But then when we look at Hispanic white, it's their credit history. So that's why I say I don't think the counseling and the education is reaching a very broad population. And that's the same for other races and ethnicities and for females. So female loan applicants are experiencing that same problem along with a debt to income issue. So yeah. Any other questions before I move on?
I guess maybe my last question on that is with the collateral, if we're seeing that as a big denial rate overall too. I was wondering about if properties are being valued at varying amounts depending on the like racial demographic of the neighborhood, and if that's just the primary reason for non-Hispanic white men because the other reasons weren't coming up, but is this still an issue like spread throughout?
It's not a primary issue. Since I did this, I put this presentation together last week, and I've actually been working with this data some more. Since then, there's like 80,000 loans to kind of parse through. So it's a lot to look at. But I have also made the observation of lower, there's appraisal or lower collateral is an issue in lower income neighborhoods, but not necessarily in minority neighborhoods. So, and that has a lot to do with there's a lower proportion of home ownership, home already owned units in low and moderate income neighborhoods. So the units that are there tend to appraise for less, but I think it may be You know, there may be some appraisal bias there. That's very hard to weed out. All right. So when we do, I mentioned geographic concentrations, and one of the things that HUD asks us to identify is, are there any racial and ethnic concentrated areas of poverty? And the way that HUD defines that is a census tract that it's at least 50% racial ethnic minority and 40% poverty. So there were actually 3 of these, what are called recaps, identified in this assessment so far. And in the last one, there were none that met that criteria. I do want to add that a 50% concentration is really, you know, in terms of Pima County, is 50% racial and ethnic minority. So, you know, to say that's a concentration is probably a loose definition. I would say above that, like closer to 60% would be something that I might define as a concentration, since 50% is kind of the norm. But we're seeing, you know, kind of an increased concentration just based on these initial definitions and the ability to compare like data with like data from the American Community Survey from 5 years ago to 2022. So you can see we've got these areas, of course, about exactly where you would expect them to be, where we have high concentrations of racial and ethnic minorities and people living in poverty. There's also out here on the reservation is also considered a recap, but we don't, because the Fair Housing Act doesn't necessarily apply there. We don't, it'll show on another map, but I just wanted you to see kind of what's going on in Tucson. So we are seeing some kind of increased concentrations, but it's more of the lowest income people who are also racial and ethnic minorities rather than, you know, I think there was a lot of discussion about gentrification and that may actually be occurring. It's hard. I didn't see that in the data, but this kind of shows that people are ending up being clustered in certain areas of the city. So that's one more thing that I'm seeing as I'm going through this data. And then
Can I ask one more question there? That 45.10% in, looks like the northern part of Tucson, is that like flowing wells or where is that?
this is tract 4510, and I want to say it's flowing wells.
I was wondering if that's like mobile home park concentration, or if you have any thoughts about these 2 pockets of 44.32 and
Yep. So this particular, I want to say this is flowing wells and that general area around flowing wells. You know, it's always been an area of high poverty, but it has not always been an area of high racial and ethnic concentration. So that's a little bit different. But yes, it is. There are a lot of mobile homes in that area, and the county's invested a lot of money in that county island. But we're still, you know, seeing that clustering. This area out here, I am not getting a whole lot of an idea of what's going on out here. I don't know if anybody has any ideas if it's largely, you know, we're quite a ways out from here's 10. So, you know, we're quite a ways east from there. But I don't know if anybody has any thoughts there. And this here may actually have a lot to do with university. So. So I've been talking to quite a few people. Actually, Kenny was one person who was kind enough to give me an interview a while back. But I'm also hearing lots of things. And I think, you know, the softness anecdotal information is just as reliable as some of the data that we have. And some of the things I'm hearing is that And we've got this influx of retirees and boomers who are coming with their money and snatching up housing, and, they're coming with their cash and snatching stuff up. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that wealth that they're bringing with them is gonna stay in the community long term. So, there's a concern there that, it's coming in, it's driving the housing prices up, and then it's gonna go away as people decide, "Oh, you know what, this isn't for me, or I wanna live closer to my family." Corporate ownership of property is driving a lot of the market problems that we're having. They tend to be more savvy about complying with fair housing laws, but they're much more likely to evict somebody. They just don't care quite as much as, somebody who's also a member of the community. There was a lot of talk about isolation of people with disabilities and elders, and how that contributes to a limited housing choice. Likewise, a need to reach disconnected youth, because there's really been a lot of disproportionate mental health impacts. And this has to do with that poverty piece of this assessment. People with disabilities being sentenced to a life of poverty, the income caps, as soon as you make this much, everything goes away. And, so, choose between your horrible, monthly check and economic opportunity. That people of color and women are more, and particularly women of color, are more likely to experience eviction than are others. I'm trying to find some data on that. I'll take any recommendations that you have. We don't have a consistent narrative. We're not sending a consistent message around fair and affordable housing. And it's diluting, our ability to make things happen. For employment options, economic opportunity just isn't there. And that's kind of the disparity that we're seeing, as people don't have employment opportunities. And the people who are most in need of housing have a mismatch with what's out there. So, this all kind of is flowing together in terms of housing choice, economic opportunity, and protected classes under the Fair Housing Act. So the goal with this analysis and some of these early impediments that I've identified is to really say, what can we do? What actions can we take that might have multiple positive impacts on the housing market, on housing discrimination, on economic opportunity, regardless of your membership in a protected class. So that's what I've got for you today. But I'd like to go back to my questions and ask you again if there is some way that this works. So let me give you a little timeline here. So I'm going to have a draft of this that's going to get reviewed internally at the city and the county probably in about September. I'm waiting for some interviews and survey information to come back in until we go a little more public. You'll see a document ready for public review around the beginning of 2025, right around the same time that the 5-year consolidated plan will be available. So I think one of the things is, how can this work that I'm doing on behalf of the city and county support your work? Maybe what is it that you're doing that can support this work? Any actions, I'm all for. What ideas do you have? I'd love to hear your ideas. And what am I missing? What, obviously this isn't everything, but is there something specific that you think I should be looking at that could help this analysis and hopefully also help with the work of this committee?
Does anybody on the subcommittee have any thoughts about Martina's questions?
I could jump in. Thanks for sharing the work in progress, Martina. It's very informative and important. It made me think, for at least for the evictions data, I know there's the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience at ASU. I think they collect some data. I haven't used it, or I'm not too familiar with it, but I think they may be gathering from the different counties metrics around there. And then I'm curious, sort of related to that too, what how long is it taking for people to be rehoused, say after they're experiencing an eviction? We know that there's impacts for that tenant's record. And that to me kind of speaks to, both the limited supply and how challenging it is to define new housing after you experience something like that. So if there's anything about like turnover, or if there's kind of churn in the market of available units for folks, is that experience different by income, race and ethnicity? Yeah, and so that's definitely more geared towards renters. And just curious how renters and homeowners, how we might tease out some of those different experiences in the impediments as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We have all this loan data, and loan application data that really helps us to look at what's happening in the lending market, and then the, purchasing and refi kind of markets. But, I think the whole eviction issue has just, of course, risen to the top in the last 5 years. And so I will look for anything and everything that I can find to try and see, what is that experience and how is it different? And what choices do people actually have? Because I think that's a big piece of this. Thank you.
Lori, Ray? I'll jump in, Martina. I think Kenny's point is well taken. I mean, I think things like eviction and other negative things that are happening in the community around housing, oftentimes impact communities of color, families with children, et cetera, more severely. And, really highlighting those things, I think, is critical. And ultimately, I think that's where a lot of the misunderstood fair housing work really needs to take place. And I guess one of the things that I'm thinking about as well that was often my frustration in working on AIs is that I didn't ever think that the follow through was there. I never felt like any jurisdiction, frankly, really used the AI to make housing more equitable, because I do think it is, like I said, I think it's one of the few documents that really addresses equity. And so I think, maybe one of the things that either the subcommittee or the full commission could do would be to review the AI and progress, on a yearly basis to create some accountability, because I think that's, just as the process is currently, again, that accountability piece is really not there. I think, most jurisdictions sign a form for HUD every year that says, yes, we're, affirmatively furthering fair housing, et cetera. But, there's no real teeth there. And then I think the other thing kind of flowing from that as well is, as I think you and I talked about, I think it's challenging to identify specific policies to address housing equity that, we could bring forward. So, if there's some things, some recommendations, particularly at the policy level or otherwise, that, we could also kind of take on to move forward. And again, I guess that really goes into the accountability piece, but really not letting this sit on the shelf and giving it some life, I think is something that hopefully would be beneficial to the city, and I think ultimately would help support our work as a subcommittee as we're trying to figure out this policy piece. And I think it also really flows into what Laura Sharp is going to present about next, which is the equity mapping and measuring that they're doing at the Office of Equity, and connecting the AI work to that measurement piece as well could be something that could support the work of the subcommittee. And I guess that kind of answers the third question as well, what research data or other info, the stuff that Laura's working on. I think if it's not incorporated or informing the AI, it certainly could.
Well, I'm gonna hang out then and listen to Laura's presentation and I'll be back in touch with you so that I can kind of share the share a little bit more detail about the impediments, and maybe from there we'll be able to really find, maybe there's just one specific policy that we just really sink our teeth into and say, what, we really want to put this forward. So I would love to be able to, do that. So there's a chat in there. Ray has her hand up.
I think it said, Martina, have you had any contact with Step Up to Justice? And I also see your hand up, Ray.
I have not had contact with Step Up to Justice, but I would welcome a contact.
Go ahead, Ray.
Okay. And thank you so much for this presentation. I didn't know that this research was being done. I'm really glad to hear about that. I was wondering, since I didn't know about this before, and I'm wondering just a little bit more context of like what your position is. And I know you explained a little bit about how this fits into the existing work. But wondering if you could, talk a little bit more about like how you normally use this, or kind of what your vision is for how this can be used.
Yep. So I'm a consultant, and I'm working on this assessment along with the 5-year HUD consolidated plan. I do a lot of program work with the city and the county. I'm on my 4th 5-year HUD consolidated plan with the consortium. So, if you've been around for a while, you've probably been in a meeting, and I've been there. But this is just my second analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. I worked the last one with Southwest Fair Housing Council, and the ones before that were done by Southwest Fair Housing Council. So this work is really, really, really evolving. What else was your question? I know I answered part of it.
Who you're hired by then? Are you hired by Southwest Fair Housing Council or by
No, I'm under contract with the city.
With the city, with Housing and Community Development?
Housing and Community Development, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Thanks. I was just, I think it's been a good discussion, and I was just thinking more about like just that evictions piece too. And kind of the questions you landed on, right? Like how to push them into implementation. I think some promising things that I've come across are just cause evictions. And so if there's clarity around, what can we track in terms of the causes, and, are there certain protections there for tenants? I know California has a pretty robust set, but I'm not too sure about Arizona. And and even going further than that, things like rental history as part of that, both renter equity, but even like a credit history, right? Is there a way to build that profile for tenants and renters? So those seem like maybe a few things to explore.
I'm just making a note.
I'm wondering, Kenny, about your ideas around the just cause eviction, and wonder where you're seeing this connection. Is that the only place I know of just cause eviction protection in Arizona is in the Mobile Home Park Landlord Tenant Act. They do require just cause for not just for eviction, but for non-renewal of a lease. And there's nothing like that, as far as I know, in the regular Arizona Landlord Tenant Act. So I'm wondering, I guess what I was hearing in that is like, how can this data be used to push for just cause eviction legislation? Not sure if that's kind of the direction you're going in, or making a case for the need for that.
I would say so. I think that's I wasn't aware of that, but I think those are all good supports, right? Good protections. If we know it's going to severely impact uh, households' ability to get rehoused or find new housing, what are some of those parameters? And it could be anything from like notification, I think, to uh, having stated reasons, right, for non-renewals and things like that. Or I think about our heat season too. There's things around utility shutoffs that if you were to lose your housing over the summer, that could be disastrous, right? So yeah, just curious. I don't know what the state is in our state at the moment, but I'd be very interested in like hearing more about that.
I was also going to mention, I think something that, we've talked a lot about and understand, how heavy a lift it is, but, if the AI could, go into, and again, it's a heavy lift for you, Martina, but, why do we remain so segregated? Like what are the actual things that are preventing us from having more integrated housing patterns? And again, I think just going back to the work that Laura is doing, um, how are we measuring that, right? I mean, it's one thing to be segregated, but I think, the what people view as really problematic about that, I mean, among other things, is that communities of color often have less access to opportunity, less access to services, have just been under-resourced for a long time. And so, is that being shown anywhere? And then is that, again, is that being measured over time, right? It's like, well, if we're going to remain segregated, or at the very least, is access to opportunity improving? Or, if there are barriers that are hard to see. I mean, I think you're onto something with the looking at mortgage lending. I mean, clearly there's still issues with how that system works in terms of, people of color not being able to get loans and whatnot. But, really looking at that, and then, thinking about some clear policies that would help break down those remaining barriers, I think are critical. And, again, as a subcommittee, we've talked a lot about it, and I think, understand its existence. But, when you really try and, peel back the onion and think about, what are the ways that we can actually address that, I think it really does fall to government in a lot of ways to, break down those barriers that were created. So anyway, again, I know it's a heavy lift for an AI because, we certainly weren't really able to do that when we did them, but I still think it's an important piece of the puzzle.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think, some of these things may very well be beyond the scope of, this analysis, but I think that there's no reason that the analysis can't include recommendations to pursue additional analysis of, geospatial resources, and how that's evolved over time, layered over our patterns of segregation. So I think that, there's some good stuff. I know that has happened, like we see fewer payday lending places, but that was state legislation, right? Like you can't group a bunch in a poor neighborhood. There's all kinds of things that have come out of this kind of analysis over time. So I think that, that may be, I'm going to do my best, but it may be that I just say, what, we got to, let's look at this further going forward. Let's really examine it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the subcommittee? Anything else from you, Martina? Any other questions or thoughts?
Not at the moment. Thank you all very much for having me today and for your attention and your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much, Martina. Let's continue on with the agenda. Our next item is the item number 5, City of Tucson Office of Equity update. And Laura Sharp is here for a presentation and discussion of the equity maps and measurement tools that she has been working on and that we have as a subcommittee, collaborated with her on previously. It's probably been a couple of years now, but anyway, she and I had a short discussion and invited her here to present today. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Laura. I can't hear Laura. Can you guys hear her?
No.
You appear to be unmuted, but we don't hear anything.
All right, how about now?
Yeah, that was the quickest IT intervention I have ever seen in my life. That was amazing.
My colleague Ellie is on the call as a listener, and she knows I've been having these trouble with my regular headset, so she ran to my aid, and I'm very appreciative.
That was great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, I was trying to say I didn't have permission to share my screen, but it looks like between
You do.
now and then yeah, now it's working. All right, are you all seeing my screen? All right, so I am Laura Sharp. I'm the Equity Data Manager with the city's Office of Equity. I thought I'd give a tiny background about the Office of Equity. It looks like there are some people on the call that maybe I haven't spoken to in the past. And then I'll talk about our Tucson Equity Data Strategy, which is one of the big lifts that I've been working on with Ellie. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about our equity action plan, which is just getting kicked off. And finally, really start a discussion about how this subcommittee and the Office of Equity can work together better in the future. And because I think that's really where we wanted to emphasize our time, I will kind of quickly go through the slides so that we can focus on that. So the Office of Equity started in 2022, so we are just on 2 years. We're in the city manager's office, which is ideal because it gives us sort of a citywide purview over helping deal with policies, programs, practices, things that the city thinks needs to be looked at from an equity lens. We see our work falling into 4 main buckets: employee capacity building, public engagement, policy advising, and data and mapping. So I'm here representing the data and mapping portion of our team. And even though these are represented as 4 buckets, really the data and mapping touches all of those areas. So if you're thinking about policy, well, you want to make that advice based on data, then, you know, my team is here to help with that. Or public engagement, if you want to make sure that you're hearing from everyone, well, you want to know where different people are and who you're not hearing from. Data can help with that. So our office really does place a big emphasis on data. We have myself and Ellie are exclusively data people. And then we're currently hiring for our engagement person and our policy person. So the Tucson Equity Data Strategy, or TED, is something that we've been working on for a little over a year now. And this is designed to provide tools and data to staff and community organizations to help them use data in their work to track equity or to work on equity. And the reason that this came about is that, you know, we are a small office. We're 2 people doing the data stuff, and the city, to really operationalize equity in the way the city does business, we need to make data collection and analysis and use really part of everyone's job. We want all of our staff and all of our community to be able to do this so that you don't have a bottleneck where everyone's waiting on an analysis by the Office of Equity and we can really only get one or two things done. So several of the things that I was thinking about when we started this was that we needed to make sure that we have demographic data. So for us, equity is making sure that our services are benefiting everyone equally, that they all have access to those services and outcomes. And without demographic data, we can't be tracking that. We also wanted to make sure that our feedback loops are representative of our community. We wanted to make sure that we had data and tools that are sustainable for the long term. So even if the Office of Equity isn't around, we still have these data processes here for people who want to use them. And coming from an IT background, I've seen a lot of good systems fall by the wayside because there was no one around any longer to sustain them. So maybe you had your favorite data project someone was working on, and when they left that job, the project went away. So we don't want that kind of thing to happen for what we're working on. And finally, because we want everyone to be involved in this, we don't want data to just be an Ellie and Laura thing. We're trying to make this as easy and usable as possible. And so I'll kind of get into how we're doing that. One of the things that Jay asked about, though, so I'm using an old presentation, but I've kind of augmented it a little based on my conversation with Jay, was who the audience is for this work. And I would say, first and foremost, it is a city staff thing. We're trying to make sure that everyone in the city can use data in their work so that transportation, environmental services, housing, police, they all have what they need to work on equity. But we also know that the city alone can't achieve equity. This is something that everyone needs to be working on. So we're also making all of the tools that are available to staff are also available to community organizations who want to use them. So if you don't have a data person, we've tried to make it as easy as possible to sort of lower the barrier of entry into that for you. And also we're providing it again publicly so that other government agencies can use our work to build on if this is useful for them. So the Tucson Equity Data Strategy is divided into 4 primary areas, and each of these is designed for a different type of user. Our Tucson Equity Priority Index is designed for decision makers. Our demographic collection standards are intended for professional staff who are out really engaging with the community and collecting data from them. Our open data site is for data analysts who we can save time by pre-processing census data for them. And for people who really don't know data at all, but they need information quickly, we have our census lookup app. And I think some of these pertain to this group more than others, so I'll kind of focus my attention on different things. The first of these is the Tucson Equity Priority Index, and this is really kind of the foundation of TEDS, and it's designed to help you prioritize where you're investing where you're making your investments, where you're prioritizing your new initiatives. You might be aware that the city already has numerous equity indices. On the right, you'll see the neighborhood vulnerability index that housing has used for things like identifying the Thrive on 29th zone. We have our tree equity index that's very popular. We have our transportation Move Tucson index, and there are others that aren't even listed here. And part of the problem with this is that it all used different demographics to understand who's vulnerable, and none of these things were being updated. So, I don't remember 5 years ago, maybe the neighborhood vulnerability index was created by the Eller College. I don't think it's ever been updated since. And same with all of these. So we wanted to develop a system where this could be updated frequently. So we're creating a new index, and this is not necessarily to replace those previous indices, but to give all of them a strong foundation that's similar. So this is a purely demographic index. It's not bringing in things like opportunity or access to local features. It's just demographics to help identify how the city understands vulnerable populations. So whether you're in housing or whether you're in parks, we're all talking about the same people that we're trying to help. It's an automated process so that, again, if we're not here, it will stay updated. It's going to be provided in all of our local boundaries, so not just census tracts and block groups, but also neighborhoods and precincts and planning boundaries, anything that people find useful for how they do their work. So if you really think about neighborhoods in your work, reapportioning that yourself from a census tract is really difficult. So that's again one of the ways we're trying to make this easier for people. And it's also supported by community input. We're currently doing a survey to get people to weigh in on the different variables that go into the index to tell us which of these truly makes people in Tucson feel more vulnerable or experience vulnerability stronger. And that's something that you all can help with if you're interested. So how would someone use the index? In this example, we're looking at bus stops, but this could be, anything related to housing that you're interested in. This is the most simple way of using an index. In all of these, the green dots are representing bus stops that don't have any shelters. So in the first one, we're just looking at all of the bus stops that don't have shelters, and it's overlaid on the equity index. In the second one, we filtered those stops down to just the areas that are in the highest priority or highest vulnerability category of the index. So that took us down from 500 stops to 200, but at $30,000 a piece, we can only afford to do a handful of bus stops right now. So how do we get that down even further to just the areas where we can have the biggest impact? Well, we can further filter the index down to just the areas where it is a high priority all around, but also we have the most people who don't have their own personal vehicle and are therefore more likely to be riding the bus. Now we've cut it down to just 22, where we can have the biggest impact. I'm going to skip the demographic collection standards because I don't think that that's extremely pertinent to this group. But it is basically a set of standards and recommendations and helpful guidance on how to collect demographic information from the public or staff when you're doing surveys and how to analyze that data. The third piece of text is the Equity Open Data Hub. You might ask, why do we need our own open data hub of primarily census data when the census already has a pretty robust website full of data? And the answer is that our open data site will focus on providing census data that is already pre-apportioned to the city's unique geography. So that's that column in the middle. It can be very difficult to apportion data from a census tract or a block group into an area that you use, more frequently in your work. So we're hoping that this will make it easier for people. There'll be less duplication of work of people trying to do that. This will also we're hoping will host other local data sets. So I was hoping to work with groups collecting the foreclosure and eviction data. If we could aggregate that and make it easily available to people. We're working with the police department to provide 45-day updates on incidents, and again, provide those in all of our unique geographies. We'll host the racial covenants data, work that was done by the university. And again, like the index, all of this will be updated automatically using a Python script. So when the data is updated, either annually or every 5 years, this will run and we'll get that updated data. or when we change our geography. So if we have an annexation or a redistricting, that data is going to get updated. This will also get archived each year. And the reason I highlight that is that one of the questions Jay asked is, how do we track things over time? Well, it can be really difficult to pull time data. And so that's one of the things that we're doing, is that you will be able to, once this starts running, pull data for each year, those annual estimates or those 5-year estimates. And finally, we have the census lookup app, and this is sort of the easiest to use tool. I think anyone on this call, I bet you would all benefit from using this tool. It just allows you to click on an area. Let's see, I've got a video. I'll pause it real quick while I introduce it. This allows you to either click on any area of the map and generate really nice looking infographics about that area on a topic of your choice. Or you can select a geometry that the city of Tucson already provides and pull information about that. And so in this video, I'm looking for information about one of our wards for, let's say, a grant that I'm writing. So I expand, let's see, play. I expand the political boundaries. I turn on the wards layer. I click the ward I'm interested in. And on this panel on the right, I click next. I look for the infographic or the data that I'm interested in, and I hover over these thumbnails to see which one has the data that I need for this grant that I'm writing. I need summary data, so I look for the community summary. I click run, and within just a few seconds, I get an interactive infographic about Ward 1 with all of these different demographics that I can drill down on to just one. Let's say I just need this one population pyramid to demonstrate something from my work. Well, I can export just that graph to put in my report, or I can export the whole document. And it really took me that long, about 30 seconds. All right, so that's TEDS going really quickly. How are we operationalizing TEDS? How are we, getting people in the city of Tucson to actually use these tools that we're creating? First, we have our equity budget analysis, which is where annually we work with departments to help them analyze their budget from an equity lens. So they have their proposed budget, and we say, how is your proposed budget impacting vulnerable communities? How is your proposed budget attempting to, hear from a representative sample of the community? So TEDS helps them, they can use our equity index to find how their work is related to vulnerable populations. They can use that lookup app, and they can use the data collection tools. The equity action plan is one that I think really needs.
Hey, Laura,
Yeah,
before you go on, I see Ray has a question, if you don't mind the interruption.
Sure.
Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you. I loved seeing that last slide about the being able to look at those different demographics. And I was wondering and I saw that housing and the year built was one of the things that we could look for. Does it also include like housing type in terms of whether it's a mobile home or public housing?
I would have to look at the app to find that, but if it didn't, we do have the option of creating customized infographics. So that's something that you all might be interested in. We could work with you to figure out what are the most relevant data points, put it into one sort of predefined infographic, and you can run that whenever you want for whatever area you want. If it doesn't already exist, we can work on that. And I can check in just a second. So the equity action plan, that is our 3-year plan to really set the roadmap for the whole city. in terms of what we're trying to achieve for equity. This is, we just had our planning workshop and it is currently being written with the goal of presenting it to mayor and council in December. This focuses on 3 strategic priorities, so inclusive culture, continuous improvement in service delivery, so making sure that our services are benefiting everyone equally, and developing a robust data tracking system, including metrics for tracking progress over time. So I'm going to probably focus on that one again in just a second. And then our equitable public engagement policy. So making sure that people are engaging with everyone in the community and hearing from them, when we do that work. And so this is again a new slide based on talking to Jay, some ideas for how the Office of Equity can work with the subcommittee better. First of all, I've identified some TEDS resources that I think are going to be the most useful: the index, the open data, and the census lookup. The equity action plan, I think, is an area where this group can really help, because we're going to be asking for the entire city and for departments specifically, what metrics do you want to track to show progress in equity? What does equitable housing look like? And I think that that's really where you guys can provide the direction and the data. We can help you. What is that data that you need to show that? How can we make sure that that is something that is actually trackable? Tracking housing equity. So again, Jay asked, how can we track housing equity? And I said, well, I'm here to provide, I can help with data. I can especially help with census data and demographic data. I can help map things and analyze things. But what I can't do is tell you what things you're trying to find the inequity of. So, what is that thing that you want to analyze equity for? And so I tried to just provide some examples of what I mean by that. So, you might want to know, are casitas, one of the strategies for dealing with the lack of housing? Are these being built in the areas that need them the most, where housing cost burden is the highest? Who's benefiting from CDBG investments? Are these going to the areas that need them the most? Is low housing quality happening in areas of high vulnerability? Maybe these questions make it clear. I don't know what questions you want to answer. But if you tell me what questions you want to answer, we can help figure out how to do that. And then finally, collaboration going forward. I talked to Larice, our Chief Equity Officer, about this, and she said that she's planning on attending these meetings more regularly, or sending a delegate, hopefully each meeting. I can attend quarterly to give updates, to work on, any areas that we identify, like analysis that you'd like to see. And we also have something called a project request form. So if you have a very specific ask that you'd like to see us work on, you want a particular analysis, or you want help tracking a particular data set, you can fill this form out and it will go into our sort of formal request, so that that will help us prioritize that in our queue of work. So that's all I've got in terms of a sort of a formal presentation.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was a great presentation and very informative. I wanted to see if any subcommittee members had any questions or comments for Laura before we move on to the next agenda item. Go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Laura. I know it's a lot of effort and really cool to see all the different tools being rolled out. This could be something for a later time, but I'm curious if you could even kind of give us a drive through with what is the housing data kind of in that census lookup tool? You know, it seemed, I think Ray was picking out some details there too, as you were, you know, going through it in the
Right.
slides.
Eagle eye, the way they caught that.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, is there stuff already there around housing by neighborhoods that we might be able to access or see further?
Yeah. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so it looks like I'm not signed in. So one of the things you'll need to do to use this if you're not part of our organization or if you don't have a ArcGIS account is create an account. It's super easy. You can do it here. And once you do that, you can run this tool as much as you want. But if you come to this website, you might not see it at first because you need to be logged in. So what I can do is, let's see, I just want to pick an area in town. I'm going to use, let's say, drive time buffers. And then I want to look at the infographic. So this is again what you saw in that little video. I can try just searching housing. And we have household growth. We have a tabular data set, custom housing market, and housing market characteristics. Those look the same. So let's see what this one has in it. And this is just one that's dedicated to housing. There might be others that also have housing in them. So it looks like it has home value, household income, mortgage as a percent of salary, year built, and some of these have multiple pages.
Is that for a single address?
No, this is for, I did a drive time. Sorry, I kind of sped through it. I clicked on a location and then did a drive time buffer. So within a 5-minute drive, a 10-minute drive, or a 15-minute drive.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you can also just draw your own area if you have a, Ellie is on the call watching me now. She normally does this demo, so she's a lot faster at this. But if you just wanted to look at, this area, then you can run that same tool for just that little area that you're interested in. The only caveat I would say is you don't want to go smaller than a block group, if you know what that is, because it's pulling from block group data and aggregating that up to the area that you've chosen. So if you pick some really small area, it's not going to be super reliable.
That's
Does
really helpful to
that-
see. Yeah, and I was curious, you know, you were saying, I think overall the strategy of kind of having consistent boundaries and geographies.
Mhm.
Is it possible to use those neighborhood boundaries with this kind of analysis you're showing us?
Yeah, so you mean just our neighborhood layer when you say neighborhoods?
Yeah, could I look at that same infographic by a particular neighborhood in the city?
Yes. So really you can see all of our the boundaries that we have over here. So we have our planning boundaries. And I just turned on the neighborhoods layer. And this is using our, it's a combination of neighborhood associations and what we're calling neighborhoods, that aren't formal neighborhoods, but we wanted to have a consistent coverage across the whole city. So you could just come in here and say, I want to see Miracle Manor, click on that, and then run through that same process.
Thank you. That is very cool.
Yeah. I guess something else I want to say is that all of this stuff is intended to be used by everyone. So we want to make it better for the needs that you all have. So if there's something missing, there's the data is there that there's data that's not there that you want. You know, we can't just take all of our time responding to requests, but we do want to, we're making these tools to be useful, and if no one uses them, then we wasted our time. So whatever we can do to make them better, we appreciate the input.
Any other thoughts or questions?
It would be lovely sometime if a future meeting, if we all like logged in before then, I'd love to do some walkthrough together too as a group, and to make sure we're really seeing the full capacity of the work that you've already done, and be thinking through what might be some, or if there's somewhere where we should be reading to get kind of that depth of what is already there.
Right.
How we might use it.
Yeah, so we're hoping to get all of our information about this again up by December. So there's not a lot of text. The tools are there, but yeah, the sort of rationale and stuff behind them is not all publicly available. But yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks so much for coming, but also for your work in putting this together. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, this is really great, Laura. I certainly appreciate the work as we all do. And just kind of reflecting on some of the things that you and I talked about. Um, one of the things that I'm really interested in is just making sure that, we have a stronger connection with the Office of Equity and with you and the work that you're doing, and collaborate more. I think we really are looking for ways to engage as a subcommittee. So, how can we support your work more, and how can we, take what you're doing and make connections, and, use this to think about policy, or, whether it's coming up with policy or looking at policies that are already in place with the city, and how, they're impacting equity. And I also think I guess to me, it's interesting that, we as a subcommittee, and I think the full commission have, been really asking for a way to measure equity over time, and how that has really not materialized. But on the other hand, you have created a tool that allows that to be done. So, it seems like there is a disconnect with what y'all are doing at the Office of Equity, which is so robust, and really, can measure equity over time. And the fact that that's kind of that connection, at least, isn't being seen by us if it's being made. So, trying as a subcommittee to continue to encourage that connection, so that we can measure equity over time. So I'm just wondering, kind of thinking out loud, um, you mentioned that there's like an equity budget analysis that's done with departments every year. Again, something that I don't think that we really have been privy to, but I think is clearly a very important thing to be done if we're gonna improve equity throughout the community and throughout Tucson. Um, Yeah, and just how is this informing policy on a larger scope? So, I do think that there are ways to really continue to elevate this work, and I'm hoping that, we as a subcommittee and the full commission can, again, really, help make those connections and collaborate with you and your office, more robustly. So, I think having you come quarterly sounds like a really great idea. We certainly look forward to those discussions, and maybe you and I can touch base before those quarterly meetings, just to kind of create a little bit better agenda, maybe some things that we're thinking about that you can bring to the table, and vice versa, so that we've got a little bit of a structure for those meetings. But anyway, this is certainly very helpful. I think gives us a lot to chew on over the next couple months. So just want to see if, again, there's any other thoughts or comments before we let Laura go and move on to the next. Yes, Neto. I think that's Neto.
Yes, that's me. Before Laura leaves, not to, well, let me just say it. The Office of Equity at a recent National ESRI conference was recognized for its outstanding work. I can't explain ESRI because I don't live in that world, but Laura can.
Congratulations.
Thank you for mentioning that. We won the Special Achievement in GIS Award for the Tucson Equity Data Strategy.
That's awesome.
I
Um,
just
yeah,
want
go
to
ahead, Laura.
echo what you said, Jay. I think you know, we've been at this for a really long time, and it sounds like the Office of Equity at the City of Tucson is doing a lot of great work, but we're kind of doing the work parallel to each other. And I think unless someone comes regularly, which has not happened, we're going to continue to do that work in a parallel way, because seeing all the data that you have available, I think, is what we've been yearning for, you know, if I can be honest, years, and what we've been asking for. So it seems really, really critical to me that we work together and that someone from the Office of Equity comes to our subcommittee, because otherwise it just feels like we're spinning our wheels a little bit.
Yeah, and I can say, when I spoke with Louise before this meeting, she said that she is planning to begin to be that person to attend each meeting. Although I do know we're hiring a policy person, so that might also be someone dedicated to this, who does deeper research into topic areas. But I do think that, you know, we're hoping to provide that. And I know I can at least attend every quarter.
Great, thanks. I also see a comment from Ray in the chat about partnering with Pima County Health. Do you partner with the Pima County Health Department? She was wondering about tracking illnesses such as cancer clusters, heat-related deaths, and how that relates to other forms of equity.
Yeah, we actually just started, we just met with the county health department on last Friday, and we're going to be setting up reoccurring meetings so that we can all be on the same page and working together, not duplicating any efforts. And one of the things that I requested is that they share their data. Right now, it's very difficult to get data from them, especially that sensitive data. So hopefully through that partnership, that will become easier.
And then I also see in the chat, with home ownership percentages, do you track at all split ownership? For example, people who own their home but rent land like mobile home parks.
So to be clear, this data, the census lookup app that I demoed is pulling from census data. So that's not our unique data. We can have it pull from our own data. So I'm actually not positive. I would say I doubt that it does pull from that. But if we had that data, we could set it up to show that. I'm not sure if we have that data though.
Great, thanks, Laura. Let's see, anything else? Are there any other, Laura, before we move on, are there any other just kind of general Office of Equity updates?
Well, I think the equity action plan is the big one. Working on that. Like I said, we're hiring 2 new positions. We are providing a foundations and equity training to staff. It's a certificate program that people have to kind of apply to be in because there's limited seating. It's not the same as our departmental equity coordinators. It's actually just training to become certified. And I think that's really a strong foundation, or will be a strong foundation for staff to understand what we're trying to achieve and why we're here, which I think people are still wondering about. Yeah, other than that, it's been pretty data heavy.
Thanks for the update. Last chance for thoughts or comments on this particular agenda item before we move on. Going once, going twice. All right. Thanks so much, Laura. We appreciate the presentation and the connection. So we will work with you to have you back in a quarter.
Great, thank you.
All right. So we're moving on to agenda item number 6, but before we get the HCD update, we do have a few more agenda items after this, and we're obviously coming up to our ending time. So I'm just wondering mostly about agenda item number 7. I think there's a lot in there about just kind of our overall general discussion about, identifying housing issues. Obviously, we shared out a bunch of readings that we hopefully had a chance to work through some at least, and we're going to talk about, which I know I would like to do, solutions, etc. So, obviously, we're not going to have time to do that today. So I just was wondering what y'all think about kind of the rest of the agenda. I guess just kind of off the top of my head, I would say maybe we just, when we get to number 7, just kind of touch base real quick and have that maybe be the main part of our next meeting so that we can talk through the readings. Obviously, Martina gave us a lot to think about, as did Laura. So I think we'll probably have a lot to kind of digest and talk about next meeting. So I'm thinking we'll probably do most of really kind of skip over number 7 and do a lot of that the next meeting. The rest of it is just kind of touching base on some things. Does that sound okay to everybody? I'm certainly open to ideas, but that's kind of what popped into my head. So I was looking at the agenda. I see some nods. Okay. Okay, agenda item number 6, HCD update.
Hi, everyone. It'll be a pretty quick update on our end. We'll have a bigger update on Sugar Hill, on Stone, and South 10th at the full commission meeting. So just for a brief update on PCHIP, we have our internal draft, and it's just going through internal edits with our leadership, and a public draft will be available at the beginning of September. So we'll make sure again that you all have that draft available. One ask that I think we might add to the agenda, if you are all agreeable for the next subcommittee meeting, is so part of PCHIP, we are creating a glossary of common terms that people might see in the plan. One of them that we want to do is housing equity, which I know has been discussed quite a bit, and kind of having that official definition. We were going to plan on maybe internally coming up with a definition and sharing it with you all and seeing if we hit the right mark, or if the subcommittee also wants to kind of come up with a definition for that, we can also do that. But just something to throw out there, we want to make sure that the subcommittee and our PCHIP plan are we're on the same page of what that definition of housing equity is.
Cool. Thank you so much. That will take us to agenda item number 7, which is our work plan. Any thoughts about this particular topic at this point, or shall we just kind of move on and wrap up with the other agenda items and pick this up next time? Any thoughts about things to add to this for next time as well? I think it covers a lot of the things we talked about today, so I don't know if we need to necessarily add anything to this agenda item for next time, but I'd love any thoughts about that while we're on it. Go ahead, Kenny.
I guess I don't know how quickly we might have ideas on this, but what would be the best way to kind of share ideas, whether in advance of the meeting, like a quick memo to each other, or come with a presentation, or what's the best way for us to kind of discuss together?
I could definitely send out an email with the draft agenda, and I think we can just kind of communicate about anything that we want to add, or kind of how we want that to go. Am I reading you right, Kenny? Is that what you were asking mostly?
And I guess I'm open to like what format should we share? You know, just talk through it, circulate things beforehand. I'm open to kind of any form of it. I thought maybe it's good if we have something in common. You know, we all do somewhat of a similar thing.
Good question. Any thoughts about that? What would work well for you, Kenny? What do you have an idea?
You know, I think like links and stuff like I think you had circulated before that's helpful to be able to dig further. But some kind of summary would be also very helpful to go along with that. You know, some signposts, and then you know if we're comfortable with it, kind of sharing our own kind of you know findings in a way. What's this all add up to?
Mm-hmm. Why don't I send out an email after the meeting, and maybe can come up with some ideas. That sounds good, and maybe take it from there so that we can kind of get on the same page. I'm certainly open to ideas, so um, sounds good. Okay, I'm gonna move us. Oh, go ahead, Neto.
Yeah, just real quick. Thank you, Kenny. Just to remind the commissioners that materials that you do send out are posted on the webpage, the commission webpage. For example, this presentation that was made earlier is on the webpage, and so just please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Neto. Moving on, number 8, action items for EHS. Again, I think we have quite a few action items that we just discussed. Are there any other action items that we need to discuss today? Number 9, action items for CEHD. Is there anything in particular that folks want to share with CEHD? Obviously, I will give the summary based on our agenda and kind of what we talked about. Was there any particular action items that we would like to bring up for CEHD at the next meeting? If anything comes to mind, obviously you can shoot me an email. But if not, I'll just give the normal summary at the next meeting. Moving on to number 10, call to the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the commission on the subcommittee, the Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the subcommittee?
No one's raised their hand.
Okay, thanks, Neto. Number 11, next steps. The next Equitable Housing Strategies Subcommittee meeting will be September 17th at 1 p.m. The next full commission meeting is September 5th at 4 p.m. And let's see. I think we've got a pretty good, one of the bullet points, create draft meeting agenda for the next meeting. I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. I think we've got some good things to talk about and at least a framework for that. And I'll send out an email before to kind of get us on the same page. And then review the main points from the meeting to report to the full commission. I'll just use this agenda to give the summary, and obviously if when I do that, anybody has anything to add that I missed or that they'd like to add, obviously I welcome that. And with that, we are at number 12, which is adjournment. So without objection, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.